Okay, I think that should be working. Got it. Okay, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us. You probably noticed that Lirad is not with us today because Lirad is fancy and presenting at a conference, so we'll send him our love. And if we've never met before, I'm Nama Blonder. I'm an architect and urban planner with Smart Density. This webinar series is this is from the ground up 2.0, and we're now featuring projects. So not the stories behind companies, but the stories behind projects. And the idea is to create this little inventory or database of projects and knowledge sharing, talking directly to the people behind the buildings. So today I have Richard Witt from Quadrangle, BDP Quadrangle, I should say. I was so good with it so far. And we are going to talk about Expo Tower 5, which is a 60-story tower in the Vaughan Metropolitan Center. So Richard, welcome. Thank you very much for being here today. And please put it in context for the audience. Let's start with that, and we'll go to some questions.
Great. So thank you very much for inviting me, Nama. It's a great pleasure to be here. I've got a few slides. I won't belabor the point because I know you've got some questions, and it's going to be more conversational. But I think it's good to put the project in context. So that red arrow that you see here at the top, that is the location of this tower. It's located within the Vaughan Metropolitan Center, which many of the listeners, I'm sure, will know, is a 432-acre redevelopment in Vaughan, right at the end of the subway. So the first time that the Toronto subway extended beyond the borders of Toronto, and it ended up here. And to make that more meaningful, the city of Vaughan created a master plan for a metropolitan center. So the you saw where that red arrow was. This is kind of zooming into that. Our client, a great company based in Vaughan, a long time Vaughan development company. It's called Hotel Group. These two towers that you can see to the right of the Expo 5 site, when we began, were the only two towers completed in the Vaughan Metropolitan Center. They were the first. Hotel was sort of the pioneers going out even before the master plan was complete. That's now 4 towers, and that project's called Expo, and that's why this one is Expo Tower 5. It's located very close to, just on the left-hand side of Jane Street is the subway. You can see where it says TTC there. But interestingly, it's right on the border of this large park, Edgeley Pond Park. So our brief from Cortel in doing this was really they wanted a building which stood out in a sea of what's often, sometimes not correct, but it is a feeling of homogeneity amongst high-rise residential buildings. And Cortel wanted something which stood out from that crowd and also stood out as a building in Vaughan. So we began with a number of different studies on this, different, and we sort of tuned down tall building typology into these different types, which are, vary based on, some do this, some do that, some are stacks, some are this. But to kind of put into context, what is a building which stands out from the crowd, and how does it stand out? How can we differentiate ourselves? So we worked through this design phase in terms of massing and also in terms of performance. So this is from the wind tunnel, RWDI's wind tunnel, where we were testing the form. And you can see the large, on the left-hand side, the large red building is Expo 5. And to the left of that is towers 1, 2, 3, and 4. What you can tell from that is that the building stands out by size to start off with. It's actually 60 stories. The other ones are more in the range of 40. So it's 1.5 times the height of those. What we did was working with the Vaughan Metropolitan Center height guidelines, which suggest 35 stories or more with density bonusing, was to put it to the absolute max it could go, which was dictated by the Downsview Airport flight path, which set the overall height limit at 194.5. Cortel felt that this needed to be a landmark of that stature, but not only in terms of height. So So it is tall, but it also works in a way that's a series of stacked boxes, which set it apart from the kind of the same continuous extrusion of plate into a building which has more presence, more dynamic form. These are some of the elevation studies. We decided that in as well as being tall, it should also perform through building envelopes. So it's not a big glass tower. It's a solid tower with punch windows. And when you have a number of stacked buildings that are moving, resolving a grid in that is much more complicated than you might originally expect. But we were very intrigued by the idea of the scale of brick, the relationship of brick from different points. So from far away, it feels like a field of color. The color itself stands out. But when you're up close, as you can see in here, you're up close and you get that feeling of kind of vernacular residential experience of being close to the scale of the brick. So it works at a number of different scales. We also have these window surrounds, which you can see here, which work to give a bit more articulation, but also in terms of wind performance as the wind goes down the building. Here's I think my favorite view of this project, actually, where you're looking down on it and you see the terraces which come down the building. You see the relationship of the park. You see how it meets the street, the public realm, which we concentrated on. How do you create a building like this in a new town? Was also a point of strong investigation. Here's the other view from the park looking at it. It's a bit more moody, a bit more architectural. The one on the left, the one on the right shows the front entrance and the forecourt, the kind of mixed usage kind of ground plane. Okay, so that was a quick overview. Hopefully that kind of sets the context. I know you have a number of questions.
Thank you. So I think the first question that comes to mind, and it was very apparent that this is a red brick tall building, which is very unusual especially in downtown Toronto. What are the advantages? Why using red brick? And if you could share some of the challenges during construction of using red brick.
Sure. So the building is currently it's fully excavated and they're coming back up in the hole. So we haven't reached the point of building the brick yet, but it's coming. And actually, the team was looking at the mock-up of the facade last week. So there's a few reasons. There's aesthetic reasons. Is how do we stand apart from the glass tower crowd was one of it. So there's a point of standing apart. There's also a point of texture and the kind of experience of scale that I mentioned a minute ago, that we really wanted something that when you get up close to it, it has a more tactile quality, that you can stand on your balcony and look at the texture of the brick, and it feels more like vernacular residential, which we also felt is more appropriate in a place like Vaughan, which is traditionally quite low rise, and is how do we make that leap from low rise to high rise? What are we finding in the middle? The other point is a question of responsible building facades. So we have a facade here which is a very modest amount of opening compared to a glass tower. So it's windows in walls, not window wall. And so all of those three things came together to create this kind of idea that we could develop something that has a bit of a different expression. When you start to think about doing brick on a high rise, though, that's actually, it's not a simple proposition. I can't put a climbing scaffold that's going up 60 stories and have, somebody at the top laying a brick who might accidentally drop it and will come down at 1,000 kilometers an hour, making a dent in the ground. So it is a panelized process, and we investigated a lot of panelized process, and but working within the industry, what we're doing is something which actually isn't that unusual at the moment, which is a precast panelized system with embedded real bricks within it. So we've worked through that system, but there's also an idea. What we're doing is panels which also come with the windows embedded in them. So the idea that we can kind of put it into place without doing all of the manual labor on site, and try and take the building of a project like this to a level beyond what is the norm, which is assembling lots of pieces, is also very strong. And it enables us to have a much stronger building envelope performance. Last week we were doing the air tightness test and the water test, and trying to get that performance to a higher level. while at the same time reducing time on site, reducing noise, reducing congestion and intrusion on the public. You're muted here.
I am muted, yeah. I'm looking at the image on the left, and the stepping back gives the building a very distinguished appearance, but I can also hear the developer's voice, what about losing the GFA? So how do you balance that? What do you answer? I'm actually very curious to know, what do you answer to the developer when, a GFA, the GFA versus the shape and uniqueness of the building?
Well, I mean, all of our work is for private sector clients, pretty much. So, the discussion about how this becomes a viable proposition and a business case is always foremost in our mind. The idea of loss of GFA though isn't really the case in this, because we're not working on a tight urban site which has a kind of a maximum gain. We actually could, we're in a almost absent context here, and even whatever context there is, we're trying to stand apart from it. So this amount of density was enough for Cortel Group, but it's not consistent. So we start from a position of creating massing rather than extruding density. So the lower levels, I can show you actually here, the lower level floor plates like this are, in the kind of almost 1,000 square foot, but when we get up to the top, they're more like 500. So, if you take, what's become a kind of customary 750 floor plate, there's a bit less at the top and a bit more at the bottom, and I think it evens out, and we're at 60 stories, and we get kind of approval is not the right word, but kind of positivity from the city by trying to create something that is different, that does stand out by doing something like this. And because of that, they're amenable to us being taller, and other kinds of positive feedback. It is really difficult in the kind of local context to do something which stands apart from guidelines being taken as regulation. So in this project, I'm pleased with how the city of Vaughan responded to it, and how positive they were about our efforts to kind of create place and work with the public around at the base, and to create kind of positivity on the skyline, to the point where the guidelines do say, or the Metropolitan Centre plan says 35 stories or more with density bonusing, but to get that, you have to create something which stands apart from the pack.
Let's talk about the guidelines and regulations, because the Vaughan Metropolitan Centre is basically creating a new downtown from almost scratch, just because a new subway station was introduced to this area. And tell us, how was the process? You don't have to put it in comparison to the city of Toronto if you don't want to, but I think it will be interesting to hear about how is it working in an area that was, tabula rasa, basically, like really starting from scratch and working into this massive transformation of an area, and how was the municipal process was?
Without making it a comparison, the city of Vaughan is in a very different context than the city of Toronto. The city of Toronto is an established place. Whenever you build something, you're building something next to something else, between something else, with a view from somewhere else. I don't know exactly. I mean, in my mind, it's, we've got a subway, let's do something with it. I suspect that the chicken and egg of that situation is more, we live in a changing place. The nature of Vaughan needs to change. Everyone has provincial targets for intensification. I think what Vaughan did in this was heroic, was to say, we need something really special, something right at the heart of the city. This amount of density is only going to be good for us. So let's do it properly. So by creating a place for this, and then kind of putting in all the ingredients that set the stage for something special, I think it's amenable to to architecture and to design. So often, the municipal process, the ONB or whatever it's called this week, is, it has a way of trying to suppress architecture, and not by intention, but it's difficult for the city staff to approve things that go beyond the guidelines, because that then gets used as a precedent for something which isn't special the next time. And so I found that in lots of projects that's been difficult. But in this case, Vaughan is saying, here's the city, we've got some basic guidelines, give us something special, we want something special. They set up, I think probably apart from Toronto, it was one of the first design review panels, which was set up 10 years ago, based on this. So, and I was part of that design review panel in the beginning. So I guess I drank the Kool-Aid in that moment, and I felt that they wanted to do something special, that they were looking for something special. And early on, we went to the design review panel. I wasn't on it by this point, but with Expo 5, and we showed them, this is what we're thinking. We've got some ideas, but we want your input. We've got a lot of things to figure out. This is what we have figured out. And I think that kind of collaboration, or working with the urban design staff, Amy Roots, I spoke to a lot, Rob Bailey spoke to a lot, and we worked in a collaborative mindset with them on what we were going to do. And Cortel has been in Vaughan for a long time, and they have great relationships with the town as well. So I think it was a very positive platform on which to create something special.
I have a follow-up question from the audience. Could you give more info about the public realm and art idea for connecting with the park and VMC master plan?
So you can see it quite well in this view. Actually, there was an idea about how the park and the public realm comes through the entry and kind of up into the tower. So a series of terraces which kind of relate to the park, and also the ground plane. It's not kind of road, curb, sidewalk. It's all kind of mixed use surface, which invites porosity and kind of penetration from all sides. And so the ground plane itself is also in the building is very open. So the building is is not floating, but definitely is welcoming. So an idea of breaking down all of the barriers between all of those elements was inherent in the way that we conceived it. In the podium, there's Cortel is a commercial enterprise, but there's an idea that we've set up a space which could provide some sort of cultural contribution to the area, which is by and large kind of new buildings with some retail at the base. So there's a different kind of space in there. I know Cortel has an institutional academic college in one of their other buildings, so that's kind of actively being sought. But with commercial enterprise, you can't. There's no cultural institution here, but that's the idea of how that base would unfold.
I want to move to talk about construction and buildability, and it's what I think about it. It's even rare enough in Toronto to see towers at this height. And what is the difference between building a 30-story tower to a 60-story tower? But just please keep in mind that our audience is not built of architects or builders, so keep your language, use plain language, please.
So there's a number of differences. One is the structure changes, and not it could be at 45-ish story. The way that the structure for gravity loads versus earthquake loads versus wind loads that shifts, which has effect on structure. So often that might turn into a structural system. In this case, it didn't. It's still a building which is based on stiffness. It's not a building which is responding through a dampening system. Is one. I think in this case, really the main difference is vertical circulation. Actually, I've got a section here which may be a bit tricky for people to see, and that's because the portrait of the tower doesn't fit with the landscape of the screen. But one of the things that we really wanted to do in this is not to have a building dominated by a summit of mechanical systems. So the majority of the mechanical system is either in the basement or at the midpoint. So you can see on this section, there's a kind of a pink line that comes up and then a blue line that comes up. So we have a certain amount of density in the lower two kind of sections and elevators which only go up to that level. Then we have the blue, which goes into the upper three sections, because you can see that the height of each of those cubes changes as well. So the vertical circulation of getting this many people up to the top is a challenge in terms of using the floor, the structural system. This is, the stepping in the structure doesn't make it less complicated, makes it more complicated. But putting the mechanical system in the middle helps us to navigate some of those changes. It also enables us to create some efficiency through the elevators in terms of taking them all up. Apart from that, I don't think, there isn't. There could be lots of differences in the way that we design it. This isn't an unconventionally constructed building. There's just a few moves of which make it different, which I hope make it more economical, which I hope make it a bit easier. But it isn't a seismic shift in terms of structural system, for example. But I don't agree with you. By the way, I think 60 stories in Toronto now isn't that unusual. In the GTA, and even in Vaughan, I think when we started this one, it was significantly higher than everything else. But I think we're going to be seeing lots of buildings at this height coming to Vaughan also.
Can you choose one challenge that came up? By the way, the building is currently under construction, but at what phase?
It's still underground, so it's approaching the ground floor. But the sort of dissatisfying experience of construction is that it takes so long to do all the work underground and then to come back up is contrasted by the satisfaction of once it's above ground. It goes very fast. The construction industry here is very efficient, I think, at building things, especially above ground. So it's still got a few years to go.
Yeah, I wonder what takes longer these years, getting a building approved with the city or getting it built.
I think you know the answer to that question.
Can you choose one challenge that came during construction or during working drawings? That doesn't matter. That one challenge that is unique to this building, or did we cover it already with the red brick? I don't know. Choose one. And
I won't say it's a challenge, but there's the challenge of trying to create something which is sets itself apart from the economy of what's the path of least resistance is always a challenge. Like for example, that resolving the grid on the exterior was a challenge, trying to make that fit with things. The elevators don't want to move, the units aren't moving, and yet the grid has to move. So resolving some of those details to get to a building which has a different form. That was challenging, and the transfers of systems as they come down was something that needed to be resolved. But I think working proactively to identify and resolve those early on was helpful.
Richard, I have a question from the audience. How do you deal with the suburban dependence on the automobile, on the car, with this type of density with a mixed use program? So we could also speak to transit, but I think it's a good question to ask in Vaughan.
It's a good question. I think we've been confronted with the kind of the nature of the automobile as a primary means of movement, the reality of that in a place like Vaughan, and the future of where it's going. So there's always kind of a tension of where the city wants things to go, where the traffic engineers want things to go, where the architect feels they should go, where the sustainability advocates think they should go. This is a place which has a high transit capacity. The Viva bus that goes right across Highway 7 is right there, which connects to lots of places, and the subway's there, but not everyone's going in those directions. Having said that, the use of things like Uber, I think they're coming. I don't know, I've been saying driverless cars are coming, but I think they are coming. I think if you look at the younger generations, which anecdotally are not getting driver's licenses, are not feeling that they need to be able to drive themselves around. I think the bigger challenge we have actually is all the deliveries, where are all those delivery vehicles parking, where are all the packages going. There's so I mean, in a building like this, the scale looks slightly off because the parking area is much bigger than under the building at 5 stories, but the amount of embodied carbon in the underground and the amount of time it takes and the cost of that is something that we're going to need to move beyond. So I think that the idea that people aren't only going to be driving itself is coming. We've seen change, and it's going to continue to move in that direction.
I think we have time for one more question because we are keeping this 30-minute concept. But I want to build the question on top of the last question. When I was promoting this, I didn't even tell you that. When I was promoting this webinar, I got an email from one of the attendees, from the audience, saying that this is obviously featuring a 60-story building is obviously not smart density, and is letting me know that is unsubscribing from all of my content, and I'm obviously just for developers. I think there is a very interesting discussion around tall buildings. Are they good for the city? In what way architects, or do you see our role as architects affecting tall buildings, or any thoughts you would like to share about the way Toronto is growing tall buildings in our discussion? Anything you would like to contribute to this discussion?
Right. So first of all, the idea that tall building isn't sustainable is somewhat surprising. As you know now, I'm part of an organization called the Council of Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat, who I think 3-4 years ago, although this past couple of years times shifted, so I'm not sure when everything was, but did a study specifically on the relative sustainability of building tall. And the findings were surprising in a way, but not that surprising in a way, and also feeds into how we thought about this project. Is the idea of creating more density is in fact inherently sustainable, but the way that we have been building tall has been less sustainable than how we built previously. So the improvements in kind of sustainable realization through consolidation of infrastructure is very strong, but building towers which have little to no insulation offsets those gains. So when we begin with this, we begin with thinking, how do we make an envelope which actually is performing above the norm, which is better to help realize the gains of that consolidated infrastructure? So is that a good answer?
No, it is, and maybe I should invite the audience to join us. The Council for Tall Building and Urban Habitat, CTBUH. It's smaller here in Toronto, let's say, compared to ULI, but it's a wonderful. We just had a walking tour, and it was absolutely wonderful. We are at 11:29, which is perfect. I love when timing is everything. Richard, thank you so much for joining us. That was, first of all, the first tall building we're featuring in this series, and speaking to the architect is always a delight. So, Richard Witt from BDP Quadrangle, thank you very much for being here with us.
Great, thank you very much, Emma. I want to say, I'm here talking about this project. We've got a big team working on a big project like this. So, thanks to the team for helping realize such a great project, and I'm looking forward to seeing it built. Thank you very much for having me on your show.